Welcome back to Midnight Confessions, where we share the raw, unfiltered truths that people carry in their hearts. Tonight's story is about Sarah Mitchell, a woman who kept a devastating secret for 17 years, only to reveal it at the moment her marriage fell apart. This is a story about sacrifice, secrets, and the price we pay for silence. So settle in, because what you're about to hear will stay with you long after this video ends. It was a Tuesday morning in Manhattan when Sarah Mitchell's world collapsed. She stood in her penthouse kitchen, the same kitchen where she'd prepared thousands of meals, watching her husband Marcus adjust his Rolex as he delivered news that would shatter everything she'd built over 17 years. "I want a divorce," Marcus said, his voice steady and businesslike. "I need a fresh start with someone who still has their youth." Sarah was 42 years old. Her husband, at 48, had decided she was past her expiration date. Marcus didn't stumble over his words. He'd clearly rehearsed this. He talked about the prenup she'd signed at 25, when she was young and desperately in love. He talked about the house in Connecticut she'd get, the monthly allowance, the generous settlement. He made it sound like a business transaction, which, Sarah realized with crushing clarity, was exactly how he saw it. "This doesn't have to be ugly," Marcus told her, as if there was a beautiful way to discard the woman who'd stood by him through everything. But what Marcus didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Sarah had been carrying a secret for their entire marriage. A secret so heavy it had shaped every decision she'd made for 17 years. And in that moment, standing in their designer kitchen with her marriage crumbling around her, Sarah decided it was finally time to tell the truth. To understand Sarah's secret, you need to understand how their story began. Sarah met Marcus when she was fresh out of Columbia University, working as a junior editor at a prestigious New York publishing house. She had fire in her belly back then. Big dreams. She was going to discover the next great American novelist, make her mark on the literary world, become somebody. Marcus was different from anyone she'd ever met. He was building a tech startup from scratch, working 18-hour days in a cramped office, living on instant ramen and ambition. While other men at the book launch party where they met talked about their accomplishments, Marcus talked about his dreams. Sarah fell hard. She believed in him when investors laughed him out of boardrooms. She proofread his business proposals at midnight after working her own full day. She held him when he wanted to give up, reminded him why he'd started, pushed him to keep going. And when Marcus's company finally took off, when the venture capital started flowing and the valuation started climbing, Sarah was right there beside him, celebrating every milestone. But success changed things. As the company grew from 20 employees to 50 to 500, Marcus needed more than a girlfriend who believed in him. He needed a wife who could represent the brand. Someone who could host dinner parties for investors, make small talk with tech journalists, smile perfectly in photographs at charity galas. "I need you to quit your job," Marcus told Sarah one night, after his company had just closed a deal that made him a millionaire many times over. "I need you full-time." Sarah hesitated. She loved her job. She'd just been promoted. She was finally getting to work with authors she admired, acquiring books she believed in. But Marcus looked at her with those eyes that had first captured her heart and said, "I can't do this without you." So Sarah quit. Because that's what you do when you love someone, right? You sacrifice. You support. You put their dreams first and trust that somehow, your dreams will fit into the spaces between theirs. She became Mrs. Marcus Mitchell, wife of the tech billionaire. She became very good at smiling at parties, at remembering investors' wives' names, at being exactly what Marcus needed her to be. And somewhere along the way, she forgot who Sarah had been before. Now, standing in that kitchen with her husband asking for a divorce, Sarah took a deep breath and began to speak. 17 years ago, when we'd been married for only a few months, I got pregnant." Marcus's face went blank. "What are you talking about?" Sarah continued, her voice shaking but steady. She told him about finding out she was pregnant on a Tuesday afternoon. She'd been terrified and thrilled all at once. She'd bought a little onesie that said, "Daddy's co-founder," because she thought Marcus would find it funny. She'd planned this whole elaborate surprise for when he got home from his 3-week business trip to San Francisco. But 3 days after she found out she was pregnant, Sarah started bleeding. She called Marcus, but he didn't answer. He was in back-to-back meetings with venture capitalists. She called again. And again. 6 times that day, she tried to reach him. Finally, Sarah called a car service and went to the hospital alone. The emergency room at Mount Sinai was fluorescent bright and sterile. A young doctor with kind eyes held Sarah's hand while they did an ultrasound. And that's when they discovered the truth: the pregnancy was ectopic. The embryo had implanted in Sarah's fallopian tube instead of her uterus. Do you know what that means? Sarah asked Marcus now, 17 years later, watching comprehension slowly dawn on his face. An ectopic pregnancy is never viable. The embryo can't survive outside the uterus. And if left untreated, the fallopian tube ruptures, causing internal bleeding that can be fatal. Sarah needed emergency surgery. The doctors removed her right fallopian tube entirely. But there was damage to the left tube too, scarring from the ectopic pregnancy that significantly reduced her fertility. The kind doctor who held her hand told her gently that while pregnancy was still possible, the chances were slim. Maybe 10%. Maybe 15. Maybe less. Sarah was 25 years old, lying in a hospital bed, processing the fact that the family she'd always dreamed of might never happen. And Marcus? Marcus finally called her back 12 hours later, drunk on champagne, celebrating. He'd just closed his first major deal. His company's valuation had tripled overnight. He was on top of the world. "Babe, you won't believe what just happened," he'd said, his voice full of joy. And Sarah, lying in that hospital bed with surgical bandages on her abdomen, made a decision. She told him she had food poisoning. That she was fine. That she was so proud of him. She told herself she'd explain everything when he got home. But when Marcus came home 3 weeks later, everything had changed. He'd been on the cover of TechCrunch. Investors were throwing money at him. He'd hired 50 new employees. The man who'd left for San Francisco was different from the man who came back. Bigger. More important. More stressed. He looked at Sarah like she was his anchor, the one stable thing in his suddenly chaotic life. And Sarah thought, how can I tell him? How can I put this burden on him now? So she stayed quiet. She told herself she'd tell him next week. Then next month. Then it had been 6 months, and how do you bring up something that happened half a year ago? Besides, Marcus kept talking about having kids eventually. When the company is more stable, he'd say. When we have more time. Always eventually. Always someday. Sarah buried the secret deeper. Years passed. The company went public. Marcus became a billionaire. They bought the penthouse in Manhattan, the house in Connecticut, the villa in the Mediterranean. They attended galas and gave to charity and smiled for cameras. And every Mother's Day, Sarah watched Marcus scroll past social media posts without even noticing. Every Christmas, when his sister brought her children, Sarah watched him play with them and wondered if he was thinking about the family they didn't have. Every time he casually mentioned, "When we have kids," it was like a knife twisting in her chest. 5 years ago, Sarah secretly went to a fertility specialist. She paid cash so it wouldn't show up on their insurance. She needed to know the truth. The specialist confirmed what Sarah had feared: natural pregnancy was nearly impossible. IVF might work, but the odds weren't good. The doctor suggested egg donors, surrogates, adoption. Sarah never told Marcus about that appointment either. She went home to their house, where Marcus was planning their Mediterranean villa, and she stayed silent. The secret had become too big to tell. It had grown roots, spreading through every corner of their marriage. How do you confess something you've hidden for a decade? How do you explain why you stayed quiet for so long? But then, 6 months ago, something shifted in Sarah. She went back to the fertility specialist, hoping for new options. New treatments. Anything. Because despite everything, despite the growing distance between her and Marcus, despite feeling invisible in her own marriage, she still hoped. The doctor ran new tests. Updated blood work. New imaging. And then she gave Sarah news that was somehow both devastating and hopeful. At 42, Sarah's egg quality was better than expected. The scarring hadn't worsened. With the right IVF protocol, the right medications, the right timing, they had a 35% chance. 35%. Not impossible. Not for a woman her age with her history. Sarah walked out of that appointment with a plan. She made a reservation at the little Italian restaurant in the village where Marcus had proposed 17 years earlier. She put the doctor's report in her purse. She was finally going to tell him everything, the surgery, the years of silence, the fear, the hope. She was going to ask if he wanted to try. If he wanted to build the family they'd always talked about. The reservation was for a Saturday night, 3 weeks before that fateful Tuesday morning in the kitchen. But Marcus came home late that Saturday, distracted and distant. He sat her down and said he needed to talk. He said he felt like life was passing him by. He said he'd been thinking about what he really wanted. He said the word divorce for the first time. Sarah canceled the restaurant reservation. And now, 3 weeks later, Marcus was asking for a divorce because he wanted someone younger. Someone who could give him children. Someone who still had time. Sarah looked at her husband across the kitchen island and made a choice. She chose truth over fear, honesty over protection, freedom over silence. She told him everything. She watched his face as he processed 17 years of secrets. Watched shock turn to confusion, confusion turn to anger, anger turn to something that looked almost like grief. "Why didn't you tell me?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I tried," Sarah said. "And then I was scared. And then it was too late." Marcus stood up, ran his hands through his hair. "We could have adopted. We could have done IVF years ago, when the odds were better. We could have." "Could we, Marcus?" Sarah cut him off. "Really? When? Between which board meeting and which investor dinner? Between which business trip and which photo op?" The words hung between them. "You want to know the truth?" Sarah continued. "The real truth? I didn't tell you because I was terrified you'd leave me. That you'd find someone who could give you what I couldn't. Someone younger, more fertile, less broken. And here we are anyway. 17 years later, and you're leaving me for exactly that reason." She pulled off her wedding ring, set it on the marble counter. "So yes, Marcus. Let's get divorced. Not because you want someone younger, but because I deserve someone who sees me. Who values me for more than what I can produce for them. Who doesn't consider me expired at 42. Sarah moved into the Connecticut house and started rebuilding her life piece by piece. She reached out to her old contacts in publishing. Turned out, the industry remembered her. Respected her. A small independent press offered her a consulting position as an editor. The pay was a fraction of what she got in her settlement, but the work filled something in her that had been empty for years. Marcus tried to call. Sent text messages. His lawyer told her lawyer that he wanted to renegotiate the settlement, give her more. As if money could fix what was broken between them. Sarah politely declined. She wasn't angry anymore. She was just done. Done carrying secrets. Done making herself smaller. Done living in fear. Some days were hard. She grieved the years she'd lost, the choices she'd made, the family she might never have. She went to therapy and unpacked 17 years of silence. She cried for the 25-year-old who'd gone to the hospital alone, and for the 42-year-old who'd finally found her voice. But she also felt something she hadn't felt in years, free. A year after the divorce was finalized, Sarah stood in a Brooklyn bookstore at a launch party for a debut novel she'd helped edit. The author was young, talented, fearless, everything Sarah used to be. When the author thanked her team, she said something that made Sarah's eyes well up. "Sarah taught me that the most powerful stories are the ones we're most afraid to tell." After the event, Sarah stepped outside into the November night and found Marcus waiting by a lamppost. They hadn't seen each other in months. "Hi," he said. "Hi." They talked for a few minutes. Marcus told her he'd been in therapy, working through issues about his father, about success, about what he really wanted from life. He apologized, really apologized, for taking her for granted, for not seeing her, for making her feel like her value was in what she could give him rather than who she was. Sarah apologized too, for building their marriage on secrets, for not trusting him with the truth. "Where does this leave us?" Sarah asked. Marcus thought about it. "Maybe it leaves us here. Two people who loved each other and hurt each other and are trying to do better. Maybe we can't go back, but we don't have to be strangers either. Sarah considered this. Maybe. Someday. When we've both healed more. Someday, Marcus agreed. As Sarah watched him walk away, she realized that closure wasn't a moment. It was a process. She could hold multiple truths at once, that she'd loved him, that they'd hurt each other, that they both needed to let go, that forgiveness was possible even when reconciliation wasn't. She turned toward the subway, toward her small apartment in the village, toward her uncertain, messy, beautiful new life. Sarah was 43. Not old. Not ancient. Just beginning. Today, Sarah runs that independent publishing imprint. She mentors young editors, helps debut authors find their voices, and publishes the kinds of books she dreamed about when she was 25. She still doesn't know if she'll have children. She's exploring adoption, considering fostering, thinking about IVF with donor eggs. Or maybe she'll decide that children aren't her path after all. Maybe being an aunt who spoils her nieces and nephews is enough. Maybe nurturing young talent is her way of leaving a legacy. The point is, she gets to decide. For the first time in 17 years, her life is full of possibilities instead of secrets. She still has hard days. Days when she wonders what would have happened if she'd told the truth from the beginning. Days when she grieves the years she lost, the family she might never have, the version of herself she buried to become someone else. But mostly, she has good days. Days when she feels proud of the woman she's becoming. Days when she looks in the mirror and recognizes herself. Sarah learned the hardest way that you can't build a life on secrets and fear. That sacrifice without honesty isn't noble, it's just slow self-destruction. That making yourself smaller doesn't make you more lovable, it just makes you disappear. She learned that truth, even when it's terrifying, is the only foundation worth building on. And she learned that it's never too late to start over. Never too late to find your voice. Never too late to choose yourself. Sarah's story isn't unique. Countless people carry secrets that slowly poison them from the inside. Secrets about their health, their past, their fears, their dreams. They stay silent because they're afraid of judgment, afraid of loss, afraid that the truth will destroy everything they've built. But here's what Sarah's story teaches us: the secret is often more destructive than the truth ever could be. The years Sarah spent hiding her fertility issues didn't protect her marriage. They didn't save her from pain. They just delayed the inevitable while stealing her peace, her authenticity, her power. Honesty is risky. Truth can be devastating. But living a lie is its own kind of death, a slow erosion of self until you wake up one day and don't recognize the person in the mirror. Sarah's story also reminds us that our worth isn't measured by what we can give others. Not our fertility. Not our youth. Not our willingness to sacrifice ourselves into invisibility. Our worth is inherent. It exists independent of our usefulness to anyone else. The question isn't whether we'll face rejection or loss if we're honest. The question is, what do we lose when we're not? Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is tell the truth, even when we're terrified. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is love ourselves enough to demand honesty in return. And sometimes, the happiest ending isn't the one where everything works out the way we planned, it's the one where we finally become free. Sarah is 43 years old, and her life is just beginning. Not because everything worked out perfectly, but because she finally stopped hiding. If Sarah's story moved you, if it made you think about the secrets you're carrying or the ways you've made yourself smaller to fit into someone else's expectations, you're not alone. Here at Midnight Confessions, we believe that everyone deserves to live an authentic life, even when, especially when, the truth is hard. Every week, we share stories of truth, heartbreak, transformation, and the courage it takes to start over. Stories of real people facing impossible choices and finding their way through. So if you haven't already, please subscribe to Midnight Confessions. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. And if this video resonated with you, leave a comment below. Share your own midnight confession if you're ready. Sometimes just writing the words is the first step toward freedom. Remember, midnight isn't the end of the day. It's the beginning of a new one. Until next time, this is Midnight Confessions, reminding you that your truth matters. Your voice matters. And it's never too late to start being honest, with the world, and with yourself. Thank you for watching. And remember to subscribe.